Welcome to the NUS Robotics Seminar. So this is an initiative by the Advanced Robotics Center at NUS. The goal of the seminar is basically to showcase cutting-edge research in robotics as of today. So we bring together world-renowned academicians, pioneering researchers, impactful robotics innovators, and the goal is to bring them together to create a vibrant ecosystem here at NUS. That's why we are very delighted to have Professor Rolf Müller here from Virginia Tech. Rolf has spent around 2.5 decades studying bats and how the sensory motor works for bats and how that could be leveraged to model autonomy in complex environments. He's currently the Lynn Professor of Mechanical Engineering at Virginia Tech and directs the university's Center for Bioinspired Science and Technology. He has been a fellow of the Acoustical Society of America since 2019. His current research focuses on the integration of AI and robotics with the inspiration from biological systems that he has worked on. He engages in a lot of international activities, including he's been at Singapore for 1 year during the sabbatical, and he has studied and conducted research on East and Southeast Asian bats for almost 20 years. I don't want to go through his publication record, but he has a stellar record of very high impactful work, and he is he's been covered by international news outlets such as New York Times, BBC, MSNBC, Discovery Channel, National Geographic, and Nature. We're very delighted to have you, Professor. The floor is yours.
And I should connect to this one. Okay, yeah, thank you so much, Khan. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. I'm really delighted to be here at NUS again after a many months break, so it's good to be back. And I want to start this presentation with a very fundamental question. And the question that I would like to put here, the first question is, what does it actually take to survive? Right, so if you are a professor or maybe a student, it's not all that different. You live in an office environment, so what you do, it's very narrow, right? What you need for survival is a computer, right? So that you can appear to be productive, and maybe a coffee machine so that you can appear to be conscious, right? And that in that narrow office environment, that's maybe all you need to survive. But surviving as a species, right, is very different from what it takes to survive as a keyboard acrobat in an office, right? So as a species, we have to accomplish things that are outside of the office. For example, food production, right? That happens out on the farm. Producing regenerable resources, right? That happens out in the forest, if it is wood. National security, right? Yes, there is vicious wars being fought in offices, but the most consequential ones are still fought out in the mud, right? So you have to operate there. And healthy ecosystems, right? So ecosystems that can sustain humanity, right? This is a thing that we have to accomplish outdoors, maybe above water, underwater. And if we want to survive as a species, we have to get a lot better with how clever we are with agriculture, with renewable resources, with national security, and with maintaining ecosystems. And robotics, automation, right, that's right, it has helped us make cars more efficiently. Maybe it can help us address these survival challenges as well. But a car factory, right, a manufacturing line for cars, and an environment like that, right, a tropical coral reef, is very different. And so if we want to have technology that can autonomously solve challenges out in a coral reef, in the rainforest, on a farm, right? We need to integrate three things, right? If you want to live, survive, act in a complex environment, you need a nimble body. That's the first thing. But because of the environmental complexity, you need to marry the nimble body with a smart brain, and you also need knowledge about this environment. So only if you bring these three things together, right, at the intersection of those three, that's where we can find this outdoor autonomy that we are looking for. Okay, so let's do it, right? It's actually hard, right? So why is it so difficult to accomplish that. So let's just focus on marriage of body and brain, right? So how do we marry a nimble body and the brain, right? So if you take a state-of-the-art robot, I asked AI to recreate that, but I guess you know which company makes robots like that. There is a gazillion parameters that you could configure that robot. Right? The same thing if you take a state-of-the-art AI system, a deep neural network, you have another gazillion parameters, right? So if you want to marry these two systems together, you have a gazillion square possibilities what this could be. Now I would say that's not a problem, right? Because we are living in the age of the deep learning revolution, right? And hasn't the deep learning revolution been exactly about that, right? The deep learning revolution is about that you have a system with 100 trillion parameters, right? And you have algorithms and you have computing hardware that are smart enough and powerful enough to figure out these parameters, right? So we just have to apply it here to this robot and brain marriage problem. And many people have tried that, right? So you type deep reinforcement learning and robotics in, right? And you get papers and papers and papers. But we are not quite there yet, right? It's not working so well. And what is the reason? What is the problem? Well, the fundamental problem is this, right? If you want to train a robot works in the physical world. So to train that robot well, you need data that represents the physical world, right? So, for example, data from experiments, right? Let's, for example, give you an extreme example. Let's say your robot is an airplane, right? You can think of an airplane as a robot, right? If you want to come up with a new airplane design and you test it, right? So you have to build the airplane. You have to set it up for testing. That's what these containers here are about. And then you have to fly the whole thing in the air and test it, right? So each data point that you collect on an airplane like this is going to be extremely expensive. It's an extreme example, but even smaller experiments, right? Even if it just costs a few $100 and takes a few minutes, right? If you have to do it 100 trillion times, right? So state-of-the-art large language models, they are trained on 100 trillion tokens, right? So even a small experiment, right? Desktop experiment, you cannot do it 100 trillion times. Now you may say, yeah, it's no problem, right? Physical experiments are overrated. I don't think they are actually, but you might say it and say, we can simulate everything. But and that's true, right? We have really good simulation tools, right? So to stay with the airplane example, right? There's powerful simulators, right? Who can simulate how air flows around, say, an airplane, right? But the problem is, if you want a simulation that is really faithful to the physical world, it's going to cost you, right? So again, take this example from the large language models, 100 trillion tokens, right? So if you have a simulation and it takes 1 second on a supercomputer, right? And you say you have 100 supercomputers, but you still have to have a trillion seconds. And I did it in my mind. I think it's 31,000 years. That's a trillion seconds, right? So it is still a really big obstacle to get to that. So that's the problem, right? And I think that's the root cause. There's a lot of other small issues, right? But whatever you try in engineering or in the sciences, there's always issues, right? But that, to me, that is the root cause. That is the root cause why we are not with embodied AI, where that's still an unresolved challenge, unlike modeling human language, right? That's essentially a solved problem. But it's a long time that I've ever seen a large language model make a mistake just with the language. But with the logic, they make a lot of, sometimes when you talk to these chatbots, you think it's more artificial stupidity than artificial intelligence, right? But their language is really good, right? I've not seen mistakes, I think, in 5 years or something like that, language mistakes. But for the robotics, that's the problem, right? So what's the way out? And so my personal approach here that I would like to make a case for here is use bioinspiration. You look at biology. So why do I think that biology is the right way out of this? Right? Because if you look at biological systems, it's all about their performance comes from system level integration. So I will give you an example, and you might know that. I know Singaporeans have access to really good seafood and eat it a lot. Have you ever wondered if you eat a lobster, right? Why the heck is that such a laborious, such a high-risk endeavor to eat a lobster? And the answer, right, so because you have to deal with the lobster shell. Right? Why is the lobster shell so obstinate? Right? So when lobsters grow their shell, right, they have access to the same periodic table of chemical elements as the rest of us, right? No unobtainium, no special materials there. And actually, they being carbon-based life forms, they're actually more restricted in terms of chemicals that they can use than we are. But what the lobster, what evolution of the lobster has done, right, they have started said, okay, what can I do at the molecular level, at the molecule? What can I do? I put the molecules into nanofibrils. I weave these nanofibrils into larger scale fibrils. I put the fibrils into sort of sheets. I interdigitate them. Then I have this twisted plywood where I orient them in different directions so that I get strength in all different directions, right? And so you have a structure that is optimized from the molecular level to the macro level, to the level that you can see with your own eyes, right? And so nature has had thousands of knobs at all these levels that over the last tens of millions of years, right, it has turned and turned and turned with one goal, right, to make you miserable if you try to get to the tasty parts of a lobster, right? So that approach, right, and you see that throughout biological system. I think that's what we should harness, right, to really learn from biological systems how to solve this embodied AI problem. As a coincidence from my own experience, right, so the deep neural networks that have brought the breakthrough in AI, right, they are actually bio-inspired, right? If you look at the elements that came from early computational neuroscience models of how the brain worked. So I see there's quite a few of you are students. When I was a student, my instructors, and I was in computational neuroscience, so my instructors used to tell me artificial neural network, absolutely no future. The future of AI was in symbolic manipulation, it was in Bayesian formulations, it was not in that bio-inspired artificial neural network stuff. And see how well that has aged, right? So now I'm standing here in front of you, and hopefully I'm more clever than the people who taught me, right? And I'm telling you, let's go back to nature. Right? That is the point when you have a new problem, and I think nature is the right way. So I personally, for my work, I'm interested again in this autonomy in complex natural environments. So I have decided to learn from the masters for that, the bats. So let me explain to you a little bit, right, why the bats, right? So usually when people say me, that's Betty, right, or he's Batman, but I think there is actually a case to be made why you want to look at bats. Right? And that brings me to this gentleman. There is actually a thing in biology called Krogh's principle. Right? So the man, you might not know him, he is August, or was August Krogh, and you have definitely heard of his company. Right? So he founded a company called Novo Nordisk, and that's the company behind these weight loss drugs, Wegovy and Ozempic. Right? So that he did not invent those drugs, but he started sort of the company and the intellectual framework behind that. And so Krogh's principle says that for any problem that you're trying to solve, right, there is a biological model system that is specifically the best for that problem. And you should pick that, right? So when you want to learn something from biology, you need to choose wisely, right? There might be biological model systems that are really good for you, and there are others that are really bad for you. And you need to make the right choice, right? And indeed, right, so here I asked AI to make a little family photo for me for the animals that have been used in the Nobel Prizes for physiology and medicine in the last 100 years. Right? And so you see it's quite varied, right? You see a squid, right? So why the hell, what an idiot studies squid, right? But that actually the squid taught us how do nerve cells in the brain, how do they convey information, right? The horseshoe crab. Why would you study a creature like that? No, that's how we found out how the retina processes images, right? That was first discovered there. And so I could talk you through all of those. There's not much time for that, but that shows you the power. So these Nobel laureates, their success, that shows you the power of picking the right model system, right? The squid, the horseshoe crab, there's over there is some sea slug where we got to the neural basis of learning and memory, right? They were just the right model system, right? And so what is it that a good model system should bring to the table? And I explained that for my model system, right, the BET, it's two things. Right, the first thing is capability, right? So the model system must be able to do what you want it to do. That's number one. But capability alone is not enough. It should also be accessible. It should be parsimonious, right? So you should pick the animal, in our case it's an animal, the animal that does what you need to do, does it really well, and then it should do it in the simplest, most accessible form possible. And if you have this combination, then you have a winner. And I think with the bats, we have a winner. And the reason why we have a winner is if we are interested in autonomy, like I am, I'm interested in autonomy in complex natural environments. Well, bats are the only, to start, right? Bats are the only mammals that have powered flight, right? So that means if they want to go left, they can go left. If they want to go right, they can go right. If they want to go up, they can go up. If they want to go down, they can go down. Few animals have that ability, right? And then they pair it with sonar sensing, right? So they emit ultrasound and listen to the echoes. And that's also cool, right? Because they have demonstrated that with this, they can go in really dense, complicated environments. So my colleagues and I, we were just on the island of Borneo. We went into the rainforest. We caught bats there, right? So these animals, right, they go cruising through the densest of jungles, right, like a real fighter is, right? If there's just a narrow crack in the foliage, they will make a ninja move with their wings and just at the right time squeeze through there. So they definitely have the capability, right? The mobility, the sensory capabilities, the integration of the two, they can do that. And at the same time, they are extremely parsimonious, right? Because all the information they need from that on the environment comes through their ears. So I'll show you some example in the next slide. How much better, how much could we actually improve technology if we were as smart as a bat? So that has been my career goal, to become as smart as a bat. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm still working on getting as smart as a bat. Right? So evolution has pushed bats to mature really quickly. Right, so what you see here in this image to the left is the bat baby, right? So they are just like us. They are born naked, helpless babies, and then they mature and they become independent, autonomous fighter pilots in the jungle for this species. And in this species, that happens in 28 days. And because all the information comes through the ears with the biosonar, you can actually calculate how many bytes of data has the bat seen to make this transition from naked, helpless baby to expert fighter ace operating in the jungle. And the answer is, I've done the calculation, the answer is it's a bit less than 20 gigabytes of data. Now, 20 gigabytes, I've Googled it, it turns out to be what the average smartphone user uses every month. So I leave it to you, I won't pry, but I leave it to you to decide how much smarter has your smartphone use made you over the last month. You don't have to tell me, I hope the number is not negative, but that is the amount of data that you need to train a fighter pilot ace in 28 days, right? And so by comparison here, OpenAI, for their latest models, they do no longer publish how much data they use for training it. I understand it's something like hundreds of terabytes now, but for GPT-3, they published 45 terabytes of compressed data. So here we have 20 gigabytes of uncompressed and here 45 of compressed. We're all friends here. Forget about the 20 versus 45. Forget about the uncompressed versus compressed. Right? Just focus on gigabyte versus terabyte. That is 3 orders of magnitude. Right? So if we were as smart as a bat, we could improve our learning technology to learn complex natural environments by three orders of magnitude. Right? So that's the range that we have here. So what do we know? What have we found out so far? And how do the bats do it? So they have. So one thing is indeed this system-level approach, right? It's not all about the brain. It's not this idea that you suck in all the data and then you have a deep neural network that churns on it. You process in different domains, the computational domain, the physical domain, and you process where the data arises, right? So bats, right, for the sonar system, in sophisticated bats, the sound is produced with the larynx, just like you and I produce speech. Right? And then it comes out of the nostrils. Right? And then you can see that these are over here. These are the nostrils of the bat. And then the nostril is surrounded by like a little megaphone. And you can see already the geometry of the megaphone is more complex than a human megaphone. It's not just a funnel. Right? But even more so, that megaphone has 14 muscles on it. Right? So what that means is, it's like I'm talking you to through a megaphone, but every word, during every word that I speak, the megaphone is changing shape. Right? The same thing for your ears, right? For the bat's ears, I would say. Right? Your ears, my ears, they live a lazy life. Right? They just hang on the side of the head and do nothing all day. In the bats, they have about 20 muscles on each ear, and these are fast muscles. So they change the shape of the ears really quickly, right? So in 1/10 of a second, the bat can completely reconfigure the shape of its ears, right? So 1/10 of a second, a human blink of an eye, you just blinked your eyes, right? Human blink of an eye is 3/10 of a second. So 3 times as fast as you can blink your eye, the bats can reconfigure the shape of the ear, right? So this is a very unusual principle, right, that you will not find even in the most advanced technical sonars that are out there. So my students and I, for quite some time now, have been building little bat robots. This is an older version, but the student who did that was really good at animating the parts, so I'm going to show you this. Right? So this is an earlier version of our bat robot, and it has this nose sleeve, the megaphone, it has the ears, and it's soft robotics, so it has little actuators on them, right? So we can recreate the motions of the bat. You see the bank of motors, then we have a little bit of onboard deep learning inference, right? And so we can carry that robot through the forest. Actually, 3 of my students, they will be here in a week's time, and they want to carry this around here, look at the wonderful tropical vegetation you have in Singapore, and see what that actually sounds like. Here you can see that it's tension-driven soft robotics that we use, but so we can indeed, in 1/10 of a second, we can replicate those fast motions. So that's one line of robots that we have. We have another line of robots for the flight. So here's our flapping flight robot, and so I'm pleased to report that it can actually fly. So here it goes, right? And it can climb, it can descend, it can make turns. So this here on the Virginia Tech campus. I'm actually pretty pleased. I call it Batboard 2.1 because it's actually based. There was a project with a collaboration project, UIUC and Caltech, and they built what they called Batboard 2.0. But Batboard 2.0, you can find YouTube videos of it. It tends to descend, right? So ours is an improvement, but not a radical improvement. So I think it's fair to claim this is the best bat model robot in existence. Temasek Lab is also having a version like that, but that cannot fly. So currently it's the best flying bat robot in the world, as far as I know. But if you counted it among the bats, it would be the world's worst bat, right? So there's a lot to be learned still from the bats. And then there is the integration between flapping flight and sonar sensing, right? So if you look at all the things that fly, right? Insects fly, birds fly, bats, and then the human-made stuff, right? of all these things, the bats have the most complicated flying machine, right? So it's really amazing that they control that just with the ears, right? It's all if you take Top Gun and you blindfold him and say, oh, okay, you go ahead and fly, right? That's the intellectual challenge here. So what I have in mind, right, once the flapping flight robot is strong enough and the sonar robot is lean and mean enough, I have this robot breeding program in mind where I want to have robots from the two lines mate and then produce offspring that have both sonar and flapping flight. But we are not there yet, not close even. So we built this. We have the bats, amazing model system. We built robots. Have we actually ever learned anything useful from that, or is it just, idle talk? So we have been able to reproduce amazing skills of the bat already, and I give you two examples here in the interest of time. So here is a skill that a very nice experiment that was published in 2024. This was not us. I'm not a sadist. They worked with bats and sort of messed with them quite a bit. And the question was, which senses does the bat actually need to get home? Right. So these were bats that had their roost over there where it says roost, and then they caught them at this lake and then manipulated them. Some they just did nothing to the bat. In others they would put a local anesthetic up the nose. So the smell, right, if you go get a local anesthetic in the nose, right, no more smell. So smell wiped out, put a band-aid over the eyes, vision wiped out, put little rare earth magnet on the head. Bats have a magnetic sense, but with a little rare earth magnet on the head, that's wiped out. So no more smell, no more vision, no more magnetic sense, sonar alone, right? And you see, they come home over kilometers. So what this shows is sonar alone is enough for these animals to navigate. And this is not the limit, right? This was just the experiment here, and this species of bat is not even the best model, right? So it would fail Krogh's principle, actually. It's not the best model system. There's bats that go in one night about 100 kilometers through the forest, right? And that's not 100 kilometer or 50 kilometer straight line, turn and come back. But really, go wild in the forest, come back. So can we reproduce that? And the answer is yes, we can actually reproduce that. So here you see the kind of echoes, or let me start. This is a path where we can track where we are. That's in the jungle of northern Borneo, right? We can figure out where we are without GPS. And the way we do it is we look at these echoes. So these are echoes. This is what the forest of northern Borneo sounds like to a bat. You see, it's a few thousandths of a second worth of sound. And if you think these things are random, just like random wiggles, well, that's what they are. They are just random wiggles. And the reason for that is sonar engineers call signals of that type, they call it clutter. Clutter means you have an echo and there's many contributing factors, right? If you imagine you are in a dense forest, right, and you have leaves around you, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands, maybe even 10,000 leaves around you, and each leaf is like a little mirror, a sound scattering facet, and it throws back a little echolet, right? And then all at your ear, or at the bat's ear, all these little echolets, they are superimposed on each other. And because you have so many of them, you cannot tell what it is. It's like, I don't know, do you have a lottery here where you draw 6 numbers or something like that? It's just, I give you the sum of those 6 numbers, right? Have you won? Right? You don't know, right? You cannot tease it apart anymore. And here it's worse, right? So these are these clutter echoes, and so navigation tech and the weights for these individual components, they depend on your sonar beam, right, where you aim it, how wide it is, where you position yourself. So if you record sonar data in a forest and you move, I would say from my experience, you displace yourself, translate 3 centimeters, you rotate 15 degrees, the echo has completely changed. So for practical purposes, if you go out in the forest and you look at the environment with sonar, you are not going to see the same echo twice. Right? So these methods, right, if you look at, there's this thing called SLAM, visual SLAM, that people like to use for navigation, right? And the idea is you match templates, right? You have a deterministic template, maybe for buildings, things like that, either in the image or in the LiDAR. Forget it. Here, this is not going to work. If you look for a template, you are never going to find the same echo again, that same template again. So what I'm really proud of is our discovery that despite being completely random, these echoes, they contain a statistical fingerprint, each of them. And that fingerprint is invariant. So the realization is different, but there is invariance in the underlying stochastic process that generates the echoes. Right? You can imagine there's trees come, different species, different age, different soil conditions. So every spot in the forest has its own statistical properties. And that's what we can recognize. So we can train a deep neural network to recognize these statistical invariants. And so without any GPS, we can actually tell in the forest where we are. Right? So that's one thing that we learned from the bats and that I'm actually quite proud about. So I'll show you another thing, right? So I talked to you about the ear motions, right? That the bats can make these fast ear motions. Remember, 3 times as fast as you can blink your eyes. And so does that do anything useful, right? And so that also was a good example, right? So people ask me, so why do you have 2 labs, right? So I have 2 labs, a robot lab and a bat lab. So much work. Why do you do that, right? And so my answer is, it's really rewarding if you do that, right? So we were the first to discover that these animals, they move their ears so fast that they actually make a Doppler shift, right? So the way sound gets into your ear, the way you perceive sound is, right, that it is first diffracted by the outer ear, and then part of the sound is diffracted into the ear canal, and then it goes to your eardrum and middle ear, and that's how you, and so on, and that's how you perceive it. So what if the surface that diffract the sound in your outer ear, what if they are moving fast, right? Then the waves that are diffracted, they will either, if the surface moves into the wave field, they will be compressed, and if it moves out of the wave field, they will be dilated. And that's the definition of a Doppler shift. Right, so you get this nonlinear, so it's a time-variant nonlinear transform of the signal that is done without any computer. It's just done by the ears moving. So is that of any, and that's something we discovered, and we asked ourselves, is it actually of any use? And so there might be multiple ideas, and we are currently exploring others, but we found one really nice use for this thing. Right, and that is telling the direction that a sound or an electromagnetic wave comes from. Right, that's an important problem. Right, if you hear a sound, the first thing you probably ask yourself is, where is this coming from? If it's a warning sign, imagine it's a siren from a police car or an ambulance or something like that. You definitely want to know, right? Oh, is the ambulance right behind me? Right? Is it going to run me over, or is it far away? So what do you need to do to tell the direction that the wave is coming from? It's an important problem. There's thick textbooks, 500 pages or so, that have been written about this problem, sound source localization, right? In the ocean, the same thing, right? You want to know where the sounds in the ocean come from. And so the textbook, they will tell you if you want to tell the direction of a sound with a pressure receiver, you essentially have only 2 choices. The first choice is that you have a sound that is broadband, that contains, so you have to have multiple frequencies. Why is that so? Right? Because then you can have a receiver that creates a transfer function that depends on the direction that the sound is coming from. So have you ever asked yourself, why is it that your ears have these funny shapes, right? Why are they not simple funnels, right? Simple plain funnels. Why do they have this funny shape? And the answer is your ears have these funny shapes because they create a transfer function that depends on where the sound is coming from, particularly in elevation, in the vertical. But so a sound that is coming from up there, my ear has a different transfer function for a sound that is from here or from here or from here, and that's what we do. That's how we tell sound in the vertical. So that's possibility 1. A single receiver and multiple frequencies, right? To estimate a transfer function, what that looks like, one number is not enough. You need multiple sampling points to estimate that transfer function. Option 1. Option 2 is, right, if I say no, 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 I just want the single frequency. Then the textbook would say, yes, Rolf, you can still do that, but in order to do it, you need multiple receivers. Right? And that's what we do for sound in the horizontal. Right? So if you have ever asked yourself, why do we actually have 2 ears? Right? And the answer is, right now you can compare. If the sound is coming from over here, it will hit this ear before that ear. It will be louder in this ear than in that ear. And that's very basic array signal processing. So the textbook would tell you, if you want to tell the direction of a sound with a pressure receiver, then you have 2 choices, either multiple frequencies, then you can get away with 1 receiver, or 1 frequency, but then you need multiple receivers, at least 2. So we were thinking, hey, what if I have a receiver, right, an ear, that can do a nonlinear transform when the sound comes in? And it turns out if we do that, right, so if you have a receiver that can do this nonlinear transform due to the motion, it's actually enough. You can take a single frequency and a single receiver, and yet you can tell where the sound is coming from. So I show you, again, I'm a great believer in stuff that you can do in the lab, right, that things work. So I'll show you how it works. So here's an example, right? So there's a little robotic, soft robotic ear with just a string attached to make a wiggle. There is a loudspeaker, it emits a single frequency, and then the task for the robot is to use the pen tilt unit and always point a little laser pointer on that piece of paper with the grating so that we can tell how precise it is. And so the answer is, right, so we emit a single frequency. This robotic pinner, outer ear, makes a single wiggle, and we can tell the direction of the sound with a precision of about 1 degree. Right? So that shows you that we can actually use that. So I would like to make a case here that you can really learn useful things if you try to be as smart as a bat. And with that, I want to, the last few minutes of the talk, I want to talk what I call Bioinspiration 2.0. Right? So Bioinspiration has given us a lot of things, right? Velcro, right? Airplanes, right? That a lot of that was bio-inspired. But I think it has not realized its full potential yet. So if you want to go after really high-value, complicated targets such as embodied AI, I think we need to elevate this whole discipline. And so here's a couple of thoughts, and then I'll finish and we can go to the discussion. What that should be. Right, so the first thing is, I think when we look at bioinspiration, we need to radically widen the scope of what we do. Right? So look across species. Right? In biology, right, you have this tree of life. These are all the different family of bats. Right? Organisms are connected through their evolutionary history. Right? That's an important, gives you important context information. Right? They are connected through their ecology. Right, so where they live and what they feed on, and that shapes them. And if you look at biology for a long time, right, so Augustus Krogh, the one from Novo Nordisk, right, he knew that, right, so he founded that discipline of comparative physiology. He also won a Nobel Prize, by the way, for his work. And so that is done in physiology and biology a lot. It's also done in genomics, right? So comparative genomics is a big thing. And I think in bioinspiration, we should do it too, right? So when we want to learn from how organisms do something, we need to consider the context in evolution. We need to consider the context in ecology, right? And really see that can help us explain what we see, right? The output that you see is shaped by ecology and evolution, so we need to consider that. That's the first thing, and I think that's where biodiversity comes in, and that's actually one reason. I mean, the first reason why I love to be in this region is, of course, because of the nice people, right? But the second reason why I like to be in this region is because of the enormous biodiversity, right? So my colleagues and I, we have just come back from the island of Borneo to actually inaugurate a research lab there. And the idea is, right, the forests of Borneo, right, they are the tallest in the world, right, so life is in the vertical, and so you have all these flying, gliding, climbing, jumping animals, right, and it's sort of like a natural laboratory for mobility in 3D, right, so if you're interested in animals that can have 3D mobility in complex environments, this is the natural laboratory for it. And that's also true for the bats, right? So there's 100 different species of bats on Borneo. Here are just a few examples. So that's the first thing. Let's widen the scope. Let's take a comparative approach that uses evolutionary and ecological context. That's number one. The second thing is we have to widen the data pipeline, right? We really need to know system-level data, sensing, actuation, brain activity. We need to know that. So my students and I, we have worked on this the flight tunnel for bats that is instrumented with 50 high-speed video cameras. It's currently in boxes on Borneo, but will soon go up in the new lab, right? So 50 high-speed video cameras, 35 ultrasonic microphones, right? That we are gathering the data here. And so that, of course, is also a problem, right? So we record, we take the bat, let it go in the tunnel, it makes a flight maneuver. Let's say we record the flight maneuver for 5 seconds. Every second, we collect 50,000 images, so you have 250,000 images. So the bat has just made one turn, and we have 250,000 images on the hard drive, right? Nobody can go and say, oh, okay, let me take a look at those 250,000 images. So my students and I, we have worked at ways that an optimization approach that uses the same optimizers that are used in deep neural networks, and say, okay, can we fit a model through those data, right? And so here you see a 3D reconstruction of the bat, right, that is based on those images, right? Zero human user intervention. Right, so that is the important thing here. Right, so just from our last field season on northern Borneo, we were able to reconstruct 900 seconds of bat flight. Now, 900 seconds, that might not be so much, right? I talk much more than that right now already. But the student Ihao, who did this work for the introduction of his first paper, he checked the literature and said, okay, so how much flight data did other people analyze to make a paper on bat flight? And the answer was 0.8 seconds. So here, 0.8 to 900, that's again the factor 1,000 that I'm always after, right? And so I think with the next version, when this is going up, my hope is to have 100,000 times more data on bats than any bat flight than anybody else. Right, scope, so it's quantity, quality, scope, but I think we can definitely make a big difference there. And the last point that I want to make about the data and also about the whole topic is that can we actually put AI in the loop, right? So if you look right now, how does actually data insight from biology go into engineering, right? So typically there's a biologist, right, and has some observation, gets data. The biologist will store the data, goes to the field, maybe goes to Borneo, sees some interesting stuff, right, takes data, stores the data on the hard drive, then goes away from Borneo, right, so goes back to Europe or to America or wherever there might be, right, so no more ability to make any changes to the data, right? Then it takes a couple of months, or depending how unlucky, maybe a couple of years, and then there might be a paper, maybe there's a YouTube video, right? And then maybe years later, an engineer will see this paper or see the YouTube video and say, aha, here's something interesting, right? But there's no way to go back to the experiment, right? It's too late, it's all done, right? And obviously the biologist who took the data, he or she had certain ideas, what they felt was important, right? And so what we want to do with our new lab in Sarawak, we want to actually put AI in the loop, right? So we want to, say, observe our bats, do one experiment, collect a terabyte of data, have an AI server, churn on that data, and say immediately, right, you should change the, say, configurations of the obstacles, right? Change them in a certain way, and then you do the next trial, right? So we can really close this loop very quickly and drive the animal experimentation towards the data that we need, instead of waiting until a biologist publishes something that might match what we need to know, right? So we can learn much quicker and much more efficiently, right? And so this is sort of our whole scheme here, what we want to do with this lab in in northern Borneo, right? We want to have this paradigm, what I call Bioinspiration 2.0, right? Really comprehensive data, quantity, quality, scope, right? Then really leverage AI data analytics, right? We live in a very exciting time. I know there's a lot of hype about AI. Don't believe anything that you hear, everything, right? There's a lot of junk and nonsense. But it has pushed our ability to pull patterns out of data. So we want to make this foundation model for a bet and then use that to solve the embodied AI problem. So that's in a nutshell what we want to do and what I had to share. But our lab is at the University of Malaysia, Sarawak, but it's a very nice space here. Right now it looks like that, but soon it will need a little bit of a renovation for the next couple of months, and then it will be filled with exciting equipment, and then you're all welcome to join us and do research together. So thank you very much. So we have time for questions?
Yeah, we have time. Yeah, any questions? Maybe I'll ask the first one.
Sure.
So you showed the localization for bats, that they could navigate for more than a kilometer, and you found the descriptors using the sound waves, right?
Yep.
Do you have any evidence that this is how even the bats do it, or is that easy to collect, hard to collect?
So at a certain, so what the experiment done by the other people here, what that shows us is that indeed sonar alone is it for the bats, right? So there's nothing else, right? So we know that the bats can navigate with sonar alone. So we know it's based on the echoes and they can tell where they are, right? So at that level, yes. But now the question is, of course, how do we process the sonar data and how does the bat process the sonar data? And that we really don't know, right? So there could be other ways. Again, deterministic templates, they're just not there, right? So in a way, I think this would go through, right, if you think about MAR, right, the idea of a computational model, right? So this would probably go through as a computational model, right? We show that the information is in the echo. We show that it can be used in the way we need to use it. But whether the bat does it that way, right, we really need to look into the bat's brain or do some more targeted experiment where maybe you would manipulate the echoes. I have no idea how you would practically be able to do that in a bat flying through the rainforest. But that would be the kind of research to really verify that the approach that we take is also the approach that the bats take, right? So it's sort of an iterative process, and maybe at some point, maybe can leave it there and say, hey, we have something that works, right? So in the end, we are engineers, right? So it should work. Okay, so that's where they stand. Thank you for the good question.
Any questions? I can ask Rolf, but
yeah, go ahead.
So you mentioned a lot about data in the initial part and also at the end. Do you force the part about experimenting with bets? Do you see as collecting data and training AI models, but also learning some physical principles in a more classical sense that can help us bridge the gap?
Yeah, I think we need to do all of the above, right? So indeed, I mean, I have focused on the AI and the opportunities that brings, but there's more classical modeling approaches and so on. And it's a tough problem, right? And so we should use, and I mean, there's integrations, right? There's physics-informed neural networks, for example, where you bring this together. So maybe I overstated that saying, AI will solve all the problems. It will not, right? So we should definitely do all of the above, right? But that's the research agenda, is really system level. So what I had already in my previous setup and will reestablish now is the sonar and the flight kinematics, and then via simulation, the aerodynamics. So that's what we had working and will soon hopefully have working again. And what we want to add in the next iteration is brain data, right? So I have colleagues in the electrical and computer engineering department at Virginia Tech that are really good recording from the brain with a lot of channels, right? So really piecing those things together and then trying to understand. And I think the synthetic, the robots is also good, right? So we do not want to say, okay, right, we first get petabytes of data on the beds, and we just study the beds, and we find out how the beds work, and then we move over and we build the robots, and we try to be autonomous, right? So the idea is we do what we can do on the beds, we have some ideas, we try it out, and then we go, and then it will not work, and then we go back to the beds and ask ourselves why, right? So that's how I see this iteration, right? That's why on the previous slide, right, I had this loop was meant to be an iteration. So I feel, yes, so it should be AI data analytics, our own physical prototypes, more traditional types of physical. I mean, if you can write down an analytic expression for something, by all means do it, right? There's nothing more powerful than that, and I definitely wouldn't stop you from doing that. Mm-hmm. Okay?
Okay. So I... you.
Hey, thanks a lot, Rolf. So this type of like robo-physical approach to like learning about nature, but also with robots in the loop, right?
Yep.
That's pretty amazing. Are you also working with biologists to try to like propose a few hypotheses? So what is your point of view of like how do we integrate the biology and then the engineering to kind of like back it up, like learn from one to the other and vice versa?
Yeah, so we have biologists in Sarawak, right, who know about the bats very well. So at the moment it's more, or has been, but we went on the bat, we went to observe them catch bats, right? So we are sort of already taking advantage of their biological and particularly local biological knowledge, right? And but I do feel it is important to work with biologists, and we just had discussion with the university leadership, and they also said you should not give up on the College of Science. I don't know if anybody from the College of Science, right? So it is a good idea to bring in biologists, right? Because again, they have this perspective, evolutionary context, ecological context, and they can bring that in. In biology, often, right, people, I think what they are missing is this ability to actually build a system, right? So I have had this, right? So I come from biology. I had a minor in ECE, but otherwise I'm a biologist, right? And I remember when I was a student, right, there were these old professors, so probably my age, but back then they appeared to be terribly old to me, right? And they all had their pet theory, right? And then one biologist said, it has to be this way. I said, you fool, it has to be the other way. But neither of them actually tried it, right? So if like you in your lab or in my lab, right, we have robots, and if you say, you know, this is how it works, and here is the start button, I turn it on, it works, there's nothing as powerful as that, right? And I think so. I feel this is really good that we talk to the biologists and do that one step at a time. But definitely, I mean, for me, interdisciplinary approach, that's the way to go, right? But it also, so it's incredibly valuable, but you also have to spend a lot of time on it, right? Because people from different disciplines, they approach problems in a different way. They have different language to articulate what they're interested in. So it's not easy, right? So, but we will try, right? So that's one goal for our lab, is really to try to work with the biologists and get the best from both worlds. Yeah, there's a question over there.
Any more questions?
Thank you, Prof, for your interesting presentation. I have one question: is what is your motivation for this species you selected, such as the master belt? Because there are many other species. They have the, as you said, the dynamic, funny shape airs. So, what are your motivations behind this animal? And is there any other animal, for example, the dog, they also have the dynamic muscles to control as. Is there any correlation behind the different species? Yeah, thank you.
Yes, so again, it's a good point, right, that biology has the biodiversity, right, and so there are these two competing things, right? So the one thing is Krogh's principle, to say you have to ask yourself what is it that you want to know, and then find the species that is the best for that. But it's also a good idea to look a little bit broader, more widely, and see how these principles are varied. So I looked at this, and I'm still looking at a specific group of bats, if there's any bat wongs here. Right? So I'm looking at horseshoe bats and old world leaf-nosed bats, because these are the bats that really have the capability to go into very dense, difficult vegetation, right? Not even all bats can do that, right? So there's about 1,400 species of bats in the world, and most of them cannot do that, right? So you really need a specialized sonar system and a specialized mobility, right, in flight. But you have these two things. You can either be terribly energy efficient or you can be terribly maneuverable, but not both. And so I have been interested in the maneuvering side. And that's why I picked those animals. But you are absolutely true, right? If you look at ear mobility, it is also can be found. I mean, we don't have much of it. Some people can change the shape of the ear, right? Move their ears a little bit. I don't know if anybody here can do it. If you cannot do it, don't despair. It's useless, right? So it doesn't matter whether you can do it or not. But there is animals like dogs and cats and horses and so on that have more ear muscles. And probably some use it in certain ways, right? So this biodiversity aspect. So I would say my approach is, yes, find the best model system, but also keep looking a little bit around. So I think both is important.
Okay. Any more questions? If not, we can thank Rolf for
thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate you taking time today. Oh, and I wanted to advertise, so we will inaugurate our new lab in December over in Kuching. Right, so it's not far from here, 90 minutes flight. So we are working on that, and I'll definitely keep the robotics people here in the loop, and you would all be welcome to join us. Thank you very much once again.